they're not finding anything. But Islam says it's the oldest city on earth, and that...
I'm not sure Islam does actually say it's the oldest city on earth.
I thought that Adam was there, wasn't he? Didn't Adam make...
It's a tradition that exists amongst Muslims,
Yeah.
but it's not mentioned in the Quran. The Quran mentions Abraham and his son Ishmael building, but there's no mention of Adam, although it's possible.
Yeah.
But in terms of Dan Gibson's theory, if you look at the coordinates that Dan Gibson provides for these mosques, they don't actually face towards Petra. And if you look at because what Gibson is doing is he's taking satellite pictures.
No, I thought he went and visited them on the ground. He actually went and visited the places. And I think he was refuted by, was it King? Dr. King.
Yeah, that's
but
right.
Then another person came along, I can't remember his name, so you have to forgive me, and he was like, and King didn't visit the site, because Gibson was in the Middle East for like 20, 25 years, whereas King he's old, he's sort of 80-something, isn't he? And then there was a third guy who came along and said, well, actually, he slightly favoured Dan Gibson.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was my understanding. And listen, I don't think that disproves Islam, but I think I think what's happening is, along with
one of the problems with Crone doesn't actually subscribe to her views that she originally expressed in Hargerism.
Yeah, she slightly changed it. Yeah.
She co-authored it with Michael Cook, and Michael Cook as well doesn't also subscribe, because they were new academics, and at the time they said they were experimenting.
Yeah, she was throwing out theory, wasn't she? But she still stands by some of it, and definitely the trade routes, the Meccan trade routes. There weren't any, were there? And Mecca doesn't exist on any historical maps.
Well, there's Tommy. Have you heard of Tommy? He's a Christian. He's a Christian writer. So he has a Mecca. He has a map of Mecca from either the 2nd or 3rd century.
My understanding didn't exist on any maps at all.
There's a map of Tommy.
I'll have to look up that. But there's certainly not trade routes were there.
I haven't looked into it.
Stop being aggressive. Stop being aggressive and spitting on his brother.
And in a sense,
You're being very nasty, man.
when you look at where Mecca is, it's in the middle of the desert. There wouldn't be any reason to go down there, unless there was a large population. And we know that the water there isn't to look after a big population. You've only got the Zamzam well, which is
very loud,
from
very
pictures that
loud.
I've never been there, but it's like a kind of, you have to go down with a bucket. I mean, it's not going to give anybody kind of a right to it.
But you know that the other issue, the problem.
And you apologise for doing it. And you apologise.
Is it okay if we just so you know that the issue is like, in early Islam, you had different groups or different ideologies competing against one another, and like the Khawarij and the Sunnis and Shias. But all of them agree about Mecca as being like the central point of Islam. But there's no tradition amongst them about Petra. So there's no hadith.
Sure, but we would probably say, I think what some scholars are saying is that it got rewritten and wiped out and destroyed that evidence of Petra.
So each of those groups hated one another, and each of them, they have their own history as to with regards to who should be the successor to the Prophet. But all of them at least agree upon the text of the Quran, as well as the general outline of Islam, such as the Mecca and the Medina period.
There's also Muhammad's enemies referred to as growers of olives and grain in the Quran, and olives don't exist in Mecca.
I think that it's in reference to maybe Jerusalem.
Oh, is it? Okay, but Muhammad was never in Jerusalem, was he?
In the Quran it speaks of the journey.
But the Jerusalem wasn't built until... Who was the person who did it? Abdul Malik, wasn't it?
Yeah, so linguistically the word mosque or masjid, the Arabic word, means a place of prostration. It doesn't necessarily refer to a physical
building. Okay.
Just like the word church.
Church means a congregation of people.
I think the Greek word is I forgot what the Greek word is, but something like that. But yeah, it refers to like a group. So the word masjid means like a place of prostration. So in the Quran it mentions the furthest masjid. And this is interpreted as being reference to the Prophet's night journey to Jerusalem.
I'm wrong, but there weren't any Muslims in Jerusalem at that point, were there?
Again, it goes back to what the word Muslim means, like in the linguistic sense. It means that someone who submits their will to God. So the Quran says that Abraham was neither Jew nor Christian, but he was Muslim. So, and what that means is that Abraham was a submitter to God's will. Obviously, they didn't speak Arabic, but they spoke some kind of Semitic or Semite language. But
they are Semites there.
So Abraham from that region, but the concept itself of submitting themselves to God existed. So,
but what about
Jesus says, "Not my will, but your will be done."
Yeah, sure.
Like in the Gospels.
Yeah, sure. But you know, what about the whole sort of farming agricultural bit about the lack? Because that's going back to Patricia Crone as well, isn't it? The dates and the olives and the enemies of Muhammad. They refer to these farmers, but Mecca there's no farming there. It's completely dry. It's in the desert. You can't grow olives there. So that points to me, in my mind, I think that gives weight to that Petra theory that that's where Muhammad was.
But there's no like actual tradition or hadith that makes mention of Petra.
No, sure, the hadith doesn't, but it does talk about Muhammad's enemies being growers.
In the hadith?
I think in the Quran, no?
I don't know which
I'll have to go and
verse,
check that.
sorry.
I'll have to go and check that. But that's what I thought Patricia Crone's work was originally founded on, that she was looking at this.
It's just that you would expect it to be some kind of tradition from early Islam. Not necessarily from Sunnis, but even like from Shias or from Khawarij or Mu'tazilis that would have like a tradition about Islam being in Petra. And also,
I'll have to go away and look at the sort of agricultural side of things.
Also look at the peer reviews as well of Tom Holland's work, and also of Hagarism as well. Of Hagarism? That was the book which Tom Holland is based upon. And there's also Neil Robinson's Discovering the Quran. He's a professor of Islamic studies from Leeds University. Neil Robinson. I think he's retired now. But he wrote a book in the 90s called Discovering the Quran. And in it he makes mention of Tomeli, an early Christian who had a map of Mecca. And he has a chapter in which he reviews Hagarism as well.
Okay, well I'll take a look. Another thing also, just about the northern one, and this is Tom Holland's work, is he says that there is a reference to Lot's pillar in the Quran, isn't there? Lot's pillar? Lot's wife. Lot's wife. You remember she got
turning into a
salt pillar.
Okay.
And that pillar is in Israel. So it's next to the Dead Sea where they think Sodom and Gomorrah was. And the reason they know that that's Sodom and Gomorrah is because there's all that sulfur there, the brimstone that came down when God came down and judged it for its immoral actions. And there's a pillar that overlooks. And the Quran, I believe, says that you will see it every day as you pass by, and it's a reference to you to be reminded. So that's also another theory that Tom Holland said. That
is this like a verse in the Quran?
Yeah, about Lot's pillar. Let me just see if Lot's wife, I can't remember Lot's wife in the Quran. Let's have a look.
Because the other thing about, like, I don't know if you ever visited a mosque, like there's the central London mosque. So just looking from the outside, you wouldn't be able to know which direction they pray. It's only when you go inside you can see. It's known as the mihrab. Which tells you the direction of prayer. But just simply from a satellite image, you wouldn't be able to tell or know.
Oh, this is back to Dan Gibson. But my understanding is that he lived there in the Middle East for like 20, 30 years and actually went and visited all these sites. And that's what got him. I mean, I would have thought it would be quite easy to work out where the Qibla is, because you get a compass out and you go, there it is, and okay, that's,
Muslims even today, what's interesting about these mosques, they don't actually all align or agree with one another.
Yeah.
So like they have like different directions, which means that people made mistakes. They thought they were facing towards the Qibla, but like human beings being humans, they're not infallible. So even today, Muslims make mistakes.
I do get that. I do get that, but it does seem
they
like
get the direction wrong.
There is a sort of early period where it was one way, and then it seems to change to a later period being another way. And I think that.
But none of these mosques agree like that they're all facing in the same direction in some other different way. It just more seems like they all like made a mistake with regards to the direction of prayer.
Yeah.
Whereas if there was this early tradition of Petra, then they would all align towards Petra.
Okay.
That's at least in my understanding.
Yeah, so my understanding was that they did originally align, the very early ones did all appear to align towards Petra, and then there was a bit of a sort of sway between either Mecca or Petra while the two warring factions were happening, and then they all turned down towards Mecca.
Well, check out the book by Neil Robertson, Discovering the Quran. In it, he's got, like, I believe, a chapter on this kind of direction of prayer of these early mosques, and he's an academic, professor of Islamic studies. But yeah, I was going to ask you, so as a Christian, do you believe in the Trinity or?
Yeah, I do. I think I'm forced to believe that, even though I don't understand it.
So,
you know.
But most biblical scholars say that the historical Jesus never believed that he was God. Like he.
No, I don't think I agree with that. No, I'd say most biblical scholars say that they're Christian, or they do the work and then they become Christian. There's only one person who I can think of who isn't. Is what's that fella called?
Bart
Ehrman, thank you.
Okay,
Yeah, he's one of the exceptions where he thinks that Jesus thought he was a prophet, and he really believed that the second coming was just about to happen.
Well, I mean that there's scholars like Christopher Tuckett, James D.G. Dunn, even I believe even Raymond Brown. He's not a Protestant but Catholic. E.P. Sanders.
I don't know these days, but yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, I would say, if you read F.F. Bruce's work, are the Gospels reliable?
Yes.
He was a Christian, obviously.
That's right.
My understanding is, again, we'd have to go away and I'd have to go away and we'd just get a list of stuff, wouldn't we? But my understanding is a lot of these biblical scholars are Christians as well, because they look at the weight of evidence and they say, yes, these are written within the lifetime of eyewitnesses.
That's not what F.F. Bruce says. So F.F. Bruce says the first of the four Gospels to be written was Mark, which was written in the early 60s. And then he says Luke was probably written like maybe mid-60s or before 70. And then Matthew and John. John, he dates that in the 90s.
Yeah, that's right.
And Matthew, I think he dates that like maybe 75.
Yeah, I agree with that. But John was still an eyewitness because he lived a long time, didn't he? He lived into his 90s. So that would mean if it was written
John
in the 90s...
doesn't claim to be an eyewitness, but it claims to be based upon an eyewitness report. But the author himself differentiates himself from the eyewitness or from the disciple.
Okay. My understanding was that John was an eyewitness. Mark was not an eyewitness, but it was written by someone who was Mark's follower, and he describes himself in the Bible as the man who runs away naked, the young man running away naked when they come to get him in garden.
That's from church tradition. But even in
he also sort of scholars, isn't it? Because he doesn't name himself, does he? Because he knows he's going to get in trouble if he names himself. So I did it because they were still looking for them at that stage in time to haul up the Christians and execute them and whatever.
Well, I mean, if you look at F.F. Bruce, he says that Matthew, he incorporates about 90 to 95% of Mark's gospel in his own. So if Matthew was an eyewitness, it wouldn't make sense for Matthew to copy a non-eyewitness when writing his own gospel, because if he was an eyewitness, then he would write from first person and speak as though he was present at the events himself, and not copy like from a non-eyewitness. And everyone agrees that Mark wasn't an eyewitness.
Wasn't an eyewitness. Yeah, Mark is. Yeah.
Sorry, he wasn't an eyewitness, but he was Peter's secretary. So So he was like Peter's interpreter.
Yeah, so if you'd seen it, I would then be right, because Peter was a fisherman, wasn't he? So he probably did it right. And so Mark was probably writing down, because he came from a wealthy family, because they also think that they met within Mark's family's house for the Last Supper. And so he would have been an educated guy. And I think that's pretty strong evidence, you know, they're so close in time to the actual events that we can
But you know, in Mark, no one worships Jesus in Mark's Gospel, but in Matthew's Gospel, which is based upon Mark, he changes the story so that people worship Jesus. There does appear.
What about when he's in the boat? Don't they say?
Yeah.
Don't they worship him on that?
In Matthew, they worship him. Yeah.
Is it not Mark? Is it?
No. So it's in Mark chapter 6.
Yeah.
Jesus walks on water and he gets into the boat. I've got the Bible on me, so.
Yeah.
Is Mark chapter 6. Okay, so the walking on the water, specifically. Okay, so I guess verse 51 and 52. Jesus gets into the boat, and the disciples. The storm dies, and the disciples do not understand the miracle of the loaf due to the hearts being hardened. But in Matthew chapter, I believe it's 14.
Okay. Then they worship him. There we are.
Did you find it? Matthew, so it's like verse number 32, after they got into the boat, meaning Jesus, they worship him saying, truly you are the Son of God.
But what he says here, he says, take courage, it is I, and I also means I am. It's the same word in Greek, I and I am.
That's right.
So he could be claiming divinity status there by saying I am.
No more than, like, for example, Paul does. You know, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, when Paul says, by God's grace, I am that I am.
It all depends on the context, doesn't it? When you say I am.
So the context of this is like when Jesus walks on water, Jesus is telling them, do not be afraid because it is I.
Yeah, but I would say as a Christian, what he really says is Jesus. I am. Not it's Jesus, it says I am God.
But nowhere in the Bible does it say that God's name is I am.
It doesn't exist. When he comes to Moses and he says, go to the people of Israel, and they have this conversation, and he says, what should I tell them? Who sent me? And he said, what is your name? It says, I am, I am. That is, and then when Jesus says it to the Sanhedrin, when he's on trial, as you know, he says the I am statement, and they tear their priestly robes, which were robes from God and ordained. Yeah. You don't do that lightly, you know. It would be like
again,
if you tore
within
up the
the
Quran,
context,
you were so cross, you know, that's the seriousness of it. And boom, you know, and then they say blasphemy. We don't need to hear anymore. You are dead, sunshine.
Well, I mean, within the context of the story of the burning of the bush, when Moses asked God his name, God says to him, I am that I am. Yeah. That doesn't sound like God telling Moses his name is I am. It just more sounds like, never mind what my name is.
Well, that could be one interpretation, but
Karen Armstrong gives that interpretation.
Well, Karen Armstrong.
She says it's like a Hebrew idiomatic expression to mean like none of your business, or never mind what my name is.
I mean, I don't know. Karen Armstrong isn't a Christian, though, is she? She's an atheist.
She was a nun, a Catholic nun for some time.
Well, there you go.
And she studied under Michael Golder, I believe.
Okay. I don't know who this dude is, but yeah, he sounds important.
I think he was maybe a colleague of F.F. Bruce.
Okay. Yeah, but I would say she's writing her book, and she's non-Christian.
Yeah, sure.
So she's going to always have that non-Christian slant on.
No one's 100% neutral. So no one's
of course, you come with your prejudices, I come with mine, and we go from there. But I would say that the Sanhedrin definitely thought the I am statement was blasphemous.
But if you read E.P. Sanders, I know you've not heard of him. He's a Presbyterian, and he's written like a what has now become like a standard reference book, like for the historical Jesus studies.
One of the Jesus seminar.
I mean, he's not from the Jesus seminar, but
because they're pretty wacky.
Yeah.
You know, if you started quoting them, I'd probably think.
Actually, have you heard of N.T. Wright?
N.T. Wright.
Bishop N.T. Wright.
Yeah, again,
So he studied under E.P. Sanders. He was a student of E.P. Sanders.
Oh, maybe that's where he's gone wrong.
So that's how big E.P. Sanders is. But anyway.
But N.T. Wright, he believes in the ordination of women, so he's against the Bible.
But he argues for the resurrection of Jesus.
Yeah, he probably does.
You know, he wrote that book, The Resurrection of Jesus, or something like this.
Yeah.
The Resurrection of Son of
God.
Yeah, E.P. Sanders, yeah, with an S at the end.
Yeah, this fella here. Right, I'll take a look.
So he's written a book called The Historical Figure of Jesus.
Yeah.
And in that book he says, basically, if you look at the response of the high priest, there's nothing in the reaction itself that tantamounts to any form of religious blasphemy or Jesus breaking any Jewish law. So if Jesus, because they
just said it's blasphemy.
Well, just because they said it's blasphemy doesn't necessarily mean it was. It's like they accuse him of breaking the Sabbath. But just because they accuse Jesus of breaking the Sabbath doesn't necessarily mean it's factual. It doesn't mean that Jesus did actually break the Sabbath.
But they were the law. I mean, that's a bit like if you're in a court and the judge says to you, you killed somebody, you're sentenced. You know, that's saying, oh, that doesn't mean I'm guilty. You know, just because the judge said. I mean, they were the law. The only thing they couldn't do in the land was execute somebody because that power was given to the Romans. They didn't have that power.
But Jesus' like disagreement with the Jews was often to do with the interpretation of the Mosaic law. So often Jesus was butting heads with them with regards to the interpretation of the law. So they accuse him of religious blasphemy, but Jesus says there was nothing that he said that tantamounted to religious blasphemy. At the court of Pilate, I believe.
Absolutely. So when he said the I am statement, he says, I'm telling the truth, I am God. So that's not blasphemy.
But they were asking him, are you the Christ? And he says, I am.
Yeah.
So Christ just means God's anointed one, or he says
king. Christmas.
Yeah, it
Christ
can mean king as well.
Yeah.
So like in the Old Testament, David and Solomon are referred to as God's Messiah, I believe. And Cyrus, the Babylonian king, in Isaiah chapter 45 verse 1, is referred to as Messiah.
As in Messiah?
Yeah.
Is he? Yeah. Do you have it there?
Yeah, it's in Isaiah chapter 45 verse 1.
Yeah, I haven't seen this, so I'd have to go away and have a look at it.
Thus says the Lord to his anointed, Cyrus. So in the Hebrew it's Meshach.
Yeah.
It's easy to remember.
Yeah, let me take a photo.
So you know Cyrus was the Babylonian.
And he sent them home. And so,
he helped them during the exile.
Yeah, and you can see his cylinder in the British Library.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, British Museum, sorry.
I think I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So.
But so Jesus says he's God's anointed, and the anointed is not the anointed. So let's have a look at the
passage in Mark.
Yeah. I think it's Mark 16.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, it's rather it's chapter 14, I think it's chapter 14 verse 62. But you know what's interesting about this is that they bring false evidence against Jesus and false witnesses to testify. But why would they have to bring false evidence? Where if Jesus did claim to be God during his ministry?
Yeah, that was before, wasn't it? So they were trying to trap him and he wasn't talking, and they sent him off to Herod, didn't they? And then he didn't send him to Herod because he thought Herod was a clown. So he came back and he said, right, enough of this. Here I am, bang, I'm God.
But it does seem like a false trial. Because they're bringing false witnesses. And
absolutely, yeah.
So even when they accuse him, it's verse number.
You can't just order to put him to death, but they found many gave false witness against him, but their testimony did not agree. Some took the stand and testified against him. We heard his, I will destroy this video, sorry. Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? Then Jesus answered, I am. I am and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power and coming with the clouds of heaven. As you know, that's a prophecy from Daniel.
That's right.
This is a prophecy of God's anointed one coming. And
So people like Bart Ehrman,
Yeah.
and also I believe E.P. Sanders, they will say, here Jesus is speaking about the Son of Man as someone else to come after him. So Jesus is predicting or prophesizing the coming of the Son of Man.
Yeah.
But sometimes when Jesus speaks about the Son of Man, it's as if it's someone else or another to come in the future.
Sure, but why then did the high priest tear his garments? What further need have we of witnesses? You've heard the blasphemy. What do you think? They all condemned him, deserving to die.
Yeah.
And you died if you called yourself God. So I think that the Sanhedrin clearly didn't understand that interpretation. They understood that Jesus was claiming divinity.
I would say they misconstrue what Jesus says.
Yeah, but surely Jesus would just say, look, I'm about to go to the cross. I don't want to go to the cross and die if I'm an innocent man, which he wasn't an innocent man anyway, as we know. But he would then say, stop, you've misunderstood me. But he doesn't. He then goes on, doesn't he?
Well, if you look in John chapter 8, verse 40, Jesus says about the Jews, you are determined to kill me, a man who spoke the truth which I heard from God.
So you're determined?
You who are seeking or determined to kill me, a man who spoke the truth which you heard from God.
This is in
John chapter
I'm not going to look at John. I just want to concentrate on Mark. Sorry, because otherwise we jump too much. And I think John's a very different form of gospel from Mark.
Yeah. What's interesting about John? John is the most like high Christology.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But even in John, it's recognized that Jesus was a man whom the Jews were seeking to kill because he spoke the truth which he heard from God.
Yeah.
But in Mark's gospel, you know when Jesus heals the man with a withered hand. And he, that's right, and because he like undermined their authority at the temple, because he was trying to teach that you could actually save a life even when it's the Sabbath, but they were saying no, like that amounts to working on the Sabbath. But Jesus disagreed with them, and so because he undermined them, it says in Mark chapter 3 that they had a secret meeting about him, and then they begin to conspire as to sentence or put him to death.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think the Jewish, he was crossed because people, the Gentiles and other non-Jews were being denied entry by the money changers. They were being ripped off. When he overturned the money tables, that's what he was cross about. That in the court of the Gentiles, they had to exchange money for their sacrifices. He was just against their whole system, wasn't he?
That's right. So it wasn't to do with anything that he claimed at that point, but even before he makes any claims, they already have made up their mind about killing him.
I could see that. Yeah, they wanted to kill him because he was setting the established order, and they were making money off it. And
precisely,
and he didn't like it.
Into a house of feast.
Later, and originally in his ministry, he's like, don't tell anybody. When in Mark he heals the man,
the blind man.
Yeah, he says, don't tell anybody, and then the person goes off and tells everybody.
Yeah,
he's
true.
like, sorry, just going back to John, even though I said we wouldn't go to John, when he turns the water into wine, he says to his mother, my time has not yet come, leave me for the moment. And so he's, rather like in the Old Testament when Israel had been brought out of, on the Exodus, out of Egypt, they're gradually learning for themselves about God's nature. So when they cross over the Red Sea, God says, don't do anything, just stand there, I'm going to save you by grace alone. Not because you're good, but just as much a sinner as the Egyptians. Then they cross across, and then slowly they have those battles, and they've got to hold up Moses' hand, and if they don't, the other side starts winning, like coming out some Midianites maybe or something, and gradually he's teaching them what he wants. And that's what Jesus' mission journey is there, to gradually move forward.
But if Jesus did claim to be God, like from the burning bush, God straight away, like from the beginning, says, I am God. Whereas if God knew that sometime in the future that he was ever going to become a man, then he wouldn't have given them that law in the first place. That if any one of you from amongst you, claims to be God or starts teaching you to worship another God other than the God that brought you out of the land. I'm paraphrasing. Then God wouldn't have given them those commandments or those laws, because if God is going to become a man and he's going to tell them that I'm God, then what is the first thing that they should do is that they should sentence him to death or put him to death.
Yeah, sure.
It makes more sense that Jesus was a prophet sent by God.
Yeah.
And the Jews, like the prophets that were sent to them previously, they tried to stone them or sentence them to...
Yeah, but against that, we also see in the Bible there's a prediction about Jesus' coming, isn't it? Where it says the Son is born, he'll be called Mighty Counselor, God, and I think it's Micah 5 is there.
Yeah, in Isaiah.
Yeah, and there are these
9,
images of what's going to come along. And I think, especially,
But what's interesting, he's called the Everlasting Father. But in the New Testament, Jesus is never called Everlasting Father. Instead, he's presented as being your brother in a metaphorical sense. So he says, like, whoever does the will of God, he is my brother, sister, and mother. Or whoever does the will of God. So Jesus is never called Mighty God, and he's never called Prince of Peace or Everlasting Father, but actually the opposite.
Yeah, but those are divine titles, I'd say, and
which are never given to Jesus in the New Testament.
Which are never given to Jesus in the New Testament. Okay, yeah, I mean,
to my knowledge, the only one I can think of, I guess, the closest is Wonderful Counselor or Advocate. So in the New Testament, Jesus is referred to as an advocate or counselor, in which he says, "I will pray to the Father, and He will send you another helper or another advocate."
Sure.
But he's
I always
definitely
refer also to Deuteronomy, where it says, "Hear, O Israel, your Lord gods are one."
Yeah.
And the Hebrew for God is Elohim, and that's a plural word.